Hey, welcome everyone to our final episode of the Automate webinar series that we've been doing. I just realized I called it an episode, but that's how it's been for us. So this is a great series which started right from intelligent orchestration, and today we're at the most interesting topic, that is a practical guide to unlocking the power of generative AI. So there's a reason this was the last that we had, because this is the one everyone has been looking forward to, and we are here today to discuss this topic. Before we go ahead, you're seeing a new face here. We were supposed to have Shail with us today, but unfortunately, due to some logistical issues, we weren't able to get him. But instead, we've got our resident innovation expert, Charles, and I'm sure Charles is going to do a great job today. All right, so let's initially some housekeeping items. So this session is going to be recorded today, and we'll send out a copy of the recording to all participants and all registrants. And it's going to be in a listen-only mode, so feel free to submit your questions via the chat, and we will have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. All right. So going ahead, let me take this time to introduce our great speakers, brilliant minds we have here, and let me start with Najeeb. Najeeb, go ahead for your intro.
Thanks, Reny. So for those that don't know me, my name is Najeeb Saour. I lead the technology and automation team here at Bernie Group. Spent the last close to 12, 15 years in the technology strategy, automation, and artificial intelligence space, and really excited to be here to talk about this subject with you all.
And Charles.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Charles. I'm a senior engagement manager with the Bernie Group, part of the technology and automation team. And similar to Najeeb, my career has been really focused on innovation technology, including automation and AI, and how it can be used to help improve business operations.
Great, perfect. Thank you so much, Charles. All right, I think we can get started with our webinar today. So today our topic is generative AI, and I've been thinking about it. Like this year, it's been generative AI everywhere I look at, right? So Najib, for the benefit of our audience, I'm pretty sure there's folks out there who's wanting to know more about generative AI, right? So can you briefly provide an overview of generative AI, its components like large language models, its capabilities, and I think illustrate what is the key difference between traditional automation and traditional AI as we know it today?
Thanks, Reny. And I think that's an important question to sort of ground us for the remainder of the conversation today. So generative AI refers to a class of artificial intelligence models and tools that are designed to interoperate or generate data, whether it's a text, an image, audio, or other content, in ways that are very similar to how you would interact with a human. So these models use a series of techniques such as deep learning and as Reny mentioned, large language models and natural language processing to basically mimic human cognition, particularly from an engagement perspective. So what you can really think about it is a chatbot on steroids. It's unlocked the ability to be more versatile in a ways that previous chatbots and other engagement models will be more rules-based, that these Gen AI engines can really provide a little bit more of that human touch in interacting with technology. With this capability, we're seeing numerous applications in art of possible solutions. I think every week I see a new one coming up on LinkedIn or doing some research that help us just handle data or more unstructured context in a bit more natural way when interacting with technology. That could be, sending an email to a GPT engine, looking at text or images. But fundamentally, what these large language models and generative AI are being used for are two major buckets of components. There are a lot more, but to me, I like to think about these two. The first is really a productivity enhancer, using something like a ChatGPT to help us generate content or illustrate a straw man of a report or create an image. For certain developers, you can use it to create pseudocode or code that you can use as a starting point to enhance applications. You can also use it to enhance productivity around documents by uploading documents into these Gen AI tools and then interacting with a console to query the information, to ask it, hey, this is a legal document. What is the governing body, or what is the jurisdiction of this legal document, without necessarily having to read through all of the content. So from a productivity perspective, I mean, we use it a lot internally, and some of our clients are starting to explore it a little bit more. aggressively. But the other piece of connectivity, and I mentioned this before, is just streamlining the way we engage with technology. So it provides us more of a human touch to chat interfaces beyond what we can program with rules. So we've all interacted most likely with either a chatbot on a website or maybe an IVR when you're calling in. The mechanics seem robotic in nature because they are. There are rules that are saying if this, then that, and if I don't understand it, I'm just going to kick you out to a human. But what this does, this technology enables us to unlock is a bit more sentiment and a bit more context understanding. So truly, we're at a world where we can interact with technology and feel like there's a person on the other side. In terms of the major players in this space, there are a few big ones. They're mainly with the hyperscalers. So we've got OpenAI's ChatGPT, that's Microsoft backed. We've got Amazon Bedrock. We've got Google Bard. We've got the Meta AI product. Each of these offer different types of engagement models, and they're targeting different user groups. But they all share the similar objective of just trying to make cognitive engagement more accessible and more available for us, either on the consumer side or within businesses. In addition to this, the skill sets around large language models, ML engineers, data science, it's created a large and growing open source community. So there's a lot more open source large language models that are popping up that you can use for very targeted types of use, whether it's like, reading a pharmacist or doctor's note. There are large language models that are just basically focused on more niche use cases that are being developed out of the open source community that's growing. To answer the last part of your question, Reny, in terms of how it's different than traditional automation, I see Gen AI as a complement to traditional automation because what it does and what other AI does is it's predictive in nature. It's reacting to data and providing its best response based on the model that it's trained. But in the end, data still needs to be fed into these models where automation and integration can come to play. Or something needs to be done with the data that's created out of these models, whether it's a decision or an update or a content creation. So really, it's a complement and an additional enhancement to automation and toolkits more broadly that we can apply to solve larger parts of business problems.
Great points there, Najeeb. I think yeah, it's pretty good how Gen AI is different from traditional AI, right? And I like your point about chatbots on steroids. Great point there, right? And how you can use Gen AI with your natural language, right? All right. So now we've got understood what Gen AI is and what the key difference is. But 2023 is pretty interesting in that there's this sudden surge in popularity for Gen AI, right? AI has been there for quite a bit of time, but what happened in 2023 that Gen AI is suddenly popular? You go anywhere you go, you see Gen AI, social media blogs, there's Gen AI. So Charles, what happened in 2023 that Gen AI is suddenly gaining all this popularity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say there's a few kind of contributing factors. Firstly, I would say, cloud happened, right? And compute got, significantly cheaper. It's now a lot easier and cheaper for people to access the kind of compute that's needed to kind of build these more complicated large language models. Leveraging kind of Amazon, AWS, or Azure, virtually anyone with some tech background and a little bit of money can go and, build their own custom LLM. Compare this to a decade ago, really only kind of the IBMs and the Microsoft of the world with their, large data center and supercomputers, only they can do this. Secondly, related to cloud is that data has now become, a lot more available. It's now a lot easier to ground data and have a large base that you can actually train these models to be very useful. A decade ago, it would take, hundreds, if not thousands of ground truth samples to train a model just to be proficient. And that's really, only really accessible to the kind of the pure researcher or the data science type profile. Not to mention, it would take month, if not to a year, to even just train that data. With the more recent technology enhancement and the newer technology available now, you can train a model with just hundreds of data in a matter of days rather than months. right? And what this has done is this made generative AI a lot more accessible to everyone. Business now can pilot and try Gen AI without having to make a large money or time investment. Lastly, this technology isn't something that I would say it just all of a sudden popped up this year. This technology has been around for quite a while, but what I would say, is the biggest difference now is we've kind of reached the tipping point where this technology is now usable by the general public, and this is largely enabled by ChatGPT. One of the key challenges that this space has been facing for quite a while is that people have to be trained in this technology in order to use it. Well, now we don't anymore, right? Any human can go into ChatGPT or Bing Chat and ask it something in human language and get a human response. It's now a lot more intuitive for the end user, and that has really largely contributed to the booming user adoption. And lastly, I would just say this is just the beginning, right? Like kind of going back to the theme of the accessibility. Earlier this week, OpenAI held a Dev Day conference and demoed their new capability, which allow anyone to develop their own version of ChatGPT for specific use cases without having any coding knowledge required. And to me, one of the main benefit of this whole rising popularity is that there's this fundamental shift that rather than thinking about, and trying to understand what this technology is that people are now focusing on what problems we can solve with technology. And, to me, that's the most exciting part.
Yeah, great points, Charles, because I find myself using ChatGPT on an everyday basis to help me with my work. And as Najeeb put, it's a productivity enhancer, right? You can use normal language. You don't need to have a technical background to actually work with ChatGPT. And then a couple of great points. Anyone with a tech background and a little bit of money can get generative AI and build your own large language models. All right. So now we actually understood what Gen AI is and why Gen AI is gaining this popularity, right? And we at Bernie Group, we are seeing there's our client leaders are actually feeling the pressure to implement Gen AI in this organization. So 2023, as a result, has become the year where CIOs have been pushed into the limelight, right? CIOs are looking to implement Gen AI. So before organizations actually jump into implementing Gen AI within their organizations, Najeeb, can you help us understand what governance structures they need to put in place and what are the secure practices they need to have before they actually jump on this bandwagon of Gen AI?
I think that's a great point, Reny. And I just want to reiterate the point Charles mentioned before about the consumerization of generative AI. I mean, we've seen it in enterprise all the time where technology being driven by the consumer ends up in the enterprise as a productivity enhancer or a tool. We saw it with instant messaging a couple decades ago. We saw it with accessibility to cloud and software as a solution. We're seeing it now potentially with the advance in Gen AI, where we're starting to learn how to use this technology to just make our day-to-day lives a bit more streamlined, and using that and applying it to an enterprise context is a next step that I think all technology leaders at least need to have on their purview. But with that influx of demand coming in, I think there's a few key considerations that organizations need to have while embarking on this journey. And I can talk about it for a few hours. But if I was to whittle it down to a few, I think the first one would be data and everything surrounding data. Like all other artificial intelligence and training models with deep learning, it's as good as the data that comes in. If it's not representative of your population or is only a sample of your customer base, you can actually, the AI can actually have unintended consequences. It can have the wrong prediction or can have the wrong interaction, which is why that data, particularly as we get into things like unstructured data, become a lot more important. You need to make sure that the unstructured data coming in that's being used to train these models, the data pipeline secure, and that your relative reporting and integration and ecosystem behind it is robust, and you're always pulling for the most accurate information, whether that's an internal policy or something in the public web. However, what's a bit more unique with these large language models is that they come with as a base product. So Typically, you're not starting from scratch, even though you can if you want to, but a lot of the larger players have foundational models that you can use as a base and then build on top of. So if you have trained ML engineers or specialists with basic interpretation, they can build this cognition using the vanilla products coming in with some of the larger players or the open source tools that I mentioned before. But truly the value in my mind of generative AI, outside of the productivity things we're all seeing on using it for day-to-day improvement, is applying that ability to use that engagement interface in a human mindset to enterprise data. Your internal policies, your HR network, your routing logic in your workflows, your templates of the documents that you use, so that you can basically interact with these Gen AI models in a way that you would in your day-to-day life to sort of look up information. So imagine a world where a customer can log onto a website and interact with a generative AI agent and ask it questions to maybe, hey, I need to order something for 20 new hires coming in next week. Can you give me a list of what you'd recommend? As opposed to, working with an agent, it can give you a starting point. But in order to do that, it'd have to have a sense of your inventory and what would be applicable to that geography. We're not there yet, but this is where the art of the possible comes into where things are going from a pattern perspective on how we can use these Gen AI tools in parallel to our day-to-day activities and what we use in our personal lives to an enterprise context. So in order for that to be effective, the data needs to be accessible, the pipeline secure, and used in a manner that it's always pulling from the most appropriate places. I think the second big one, and this has happened a lot in particularly the early stages of 2023, is around ethics and IP. So using particularly Gen AI tools to stitch together whether it's content like a report or images for a marketing campaign. When it's pulling information from public sources, it can expose you to risk of copyright infringement or intellectual property issues. But on the flip side of that, we're seeing now Gen AI tools and some of the leaders enable you to basically partition your own large language model and have it in a secure, only your enterprise can use it, so that as you're training this model and you're building competitive advantage and competitive pieces of your LLMs, you're not sharing it with your, potentially the public or other competitors. So I'd say the second piece is really around ethics and intellectual property. The third, I would say, is the culture around approaching delivery with AI. I think later we're going to cover things around change management, but what I mean about this is when we're dealing with artificial intelligence, whether it's predictive models or large language models, we're no longer dealing with software implementation where we're looking for a feature and that feature is either there or it's not. It's a lot more gray. So what we need from particularly these large language models is I need it to be able to interact in this setting with this context in a confident manner. And when it's not sure, kick it out to a person to do. That is the high level archetype, but the nuances in between them, as you can imagine, if you've ever interacted with a business for, a bank or a telco, like every interaction has some uniqueness to it. So the efficacy and effectiveness of these models need to be monitored and sort of tracked through inception all the way into operation and tweaked so that you're covering the most part of your volume coming in as possible to make sure that the LLMs are actually hitting the mark with engagement. Also, I think Reny mentioned the hype over the last 12 to 16 months around generative AI. I think there's a lot of hype and pressure around starting somewhere, but starting somewhere with the wrong intention and the wrong strategy will just end up, potentially leading to sunk investments. So I think having a good starting point is a really, really important piece. In my mind, there are individual use cases for these large language models and the engagement items I've mentioned before, but I think true wins are going to be connecting these large language models either with a omni-channel web form interface to kick off potentially an onboarding process in the background, or other types of archetypes where you're latching on part of the process that's unstructured in nature, which is dealing with people, and then able to structure that data in a way to either pass it to a back office team with a bit more structure, or connecting it with other tools to make you be able to automate more end to end.
Perfect. Some great points there, Najeeb. the importance of data in while implementing Gen AI, keeping an eye out for IP, intellectual property. That's also important. And I think, well, great point there about how implementation of Gen AI is different from, you need to have a different mindset from implementation of software development. So I think we had a question from the audience, from Sumon, who actually asked this exact same question. So Sumon, I'm hoping that we've answered your question. If you'd like us to elaborate more on that, feel free to shoot another question, and we can take that towards the end of the webinar. But I hope that answered your question, Sumon.
Yeah, I could add one more thing is, like Charles mentioned this before, and I did a little bit, that these tools are still maturing. As you start to play with either the public available, say ChatGPTs, or if you get GPT-4 or the new ones they're coming up with, you'll identify that they do have some limitations. So one of the use cases I mentioned before about loading up a document into a GPT engine or an LLM and querying it for information because it's a large piece, sometimes these things crap out at 20 pages or 2 pages, and it's a bit inconsistent in nature. So I think as the capability matures, you'll start to see these hiccups that I think that the product companies are gonna to sort of try and knot up and clean up a bit. But I think just understanding the capability and where it's going is good.
Yeah, great point, Najeeb, because the length of the prompt was a limitation factor for Gen AI. But I think recently ChatGPT, OpenAI came out, they've increased the length of the prompt and made it cheaper for use as well. Yeah, great point, Jesse. Yeah, the length of responses is also pretty challenging because it's limited in that aspect as well. All right. So now we actually saw what governance you need to implement within your organization as you get on this Gen AI journey. But there's another important piece of it that is around change management, right? You've implemented Gen AI, but you need to ensure there's a cultural shift within the organization, and make sure that employees are ready to embrace and collaborate effectively with Gen AI, and as they work with these AI powered tools and processes, right? There needs to be some kind of change within the organization. So Charles, can you help our audience here understand what needs to happen as the organization gets on this Gen AI journey?
For sure, yeah, that's a really good question. And I will say, in my perspective, if I could summarize it in kind of 2 words, the 2 biggest, organizational change and culture shift that I would say is governance and trust, right? And I know Najeeb talked a bit about governance earlier, but I just want to kind of reiterate the importance of governance. So the way I kind of think of Gen AI is that I think it's more appropriate to think of it as a kind of a new programming language rather than a new software application. And I'll get to why I say this in a moment. So imagine that all your employees, suddenly wake up and kind of know Python or is adept at developing apps tomorrow. Would you tell them to say, hey, go ahead and develop whatever program or app that you want and deploy it? Of course not, right? Your IT, security, or compliance department, will throw a fit. You will want to have the governance around, who's doing the code review, what's testing like, what's QA like, what about security, best practice, etc. All the things that we do with the traditional software development lifecycle. Well, going back to Gen AI, to me, it's kind of the similar concept, but instead of code, it's now prompt. Right, you will need governance around, who can write prompt, what prompt to use at what time, what large language model version are we using to generate those prompts, and what are some of the guardrail in place, etc. So these are all kind of the enterprise scale governance question that now needs to be considered as we think about, deploying Gen AI across the entire organization. I will say, governance is governance around Gen AI is probably the most one of the most important organizational change that's critical to its success. The second word I mentioned earlier is trust, right? And this has more to do with kind of a mentality shift for the organization rather than a org change. And what I mean by trust is a trust that people have in the Gen AI technology. As with any kind of new software implementation or technology implementation, the fastest way to get it uninstalled by the end user is if they don't trust if they don't trust the technology, right? And no one end up using it. Similarly, in order for people to embrace generative AI, people need to be able to trust its output. No one's going to put their job or reputation on the line if they don't trust the technology that it's going to give them, accurate information. But conversely, this is also what's unique with generative AI is that it's a finicky technology and can and will be incorrect sometimes. I'm sure you've all heard of the term hallucination, where the output from Gen AI can be completely made up of false information, right? And this is where I think, in my opinion, is the biggest mentality shift from other traditional software application deployment, which is that you can't really fully trust Gen AI either. Right. So the biggest challenge, for organization from a culture shift perspective is really try to find that right level of trust among your employee so that people aren't blindly trusting the output of Gen AI, but at the same time have enough trust to use it to assist them in their daily jobs.
Some great points there, Charles. And I think trust is critical to the success of Gen AI. And I think people out there have started to trust the new technology that's Gen AI because people are using it in their day-to-day lives, right? But you need to take the output with a pinch of salt and make sure that it's accurate before you actually use it for yourself. So I think we can start taking questions, and we actually have a great question from Sumon here. Either of you, Najeeb or Charles, feel free to take it. So the question here is. Companies have some use cases. They don't have, it's different types of use cases, and it's not one size fits all, right? You'll have one LLM model which might work for a particular use case, but it might not work for another use case, right? So what are your thoughts in building different LLMs for each use case as it fits? Because that might be detrimental, the cost of building LLM and the result of it, right? So what are your thoughts on this, Najeeb, Charles?
Charles, you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, so I think kind of going back to, the example I would say is, this goes back to the question of, do we want one vendor or best of breed, right? Similarly with LM, you have you kind of have the same choice, right? Do you kind of go to choose a LM that's almost kind of one size fits all, or do you go with different one that's best of breed? And I think, that's almost the age-old question, I think, in any software application is, try to choose, the best of breed or kind of the one vendor. I think to me, that really depends on the specific situation or use cases for the company. And I would say you have to probably look at each one in isolation.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it depends on the use case. Like if you're looking for something like a chat interface, the idea of multimodal may not make sense, right? You don't want to have like two chat interfaces behind something. It just might muck up the engagement and confuse the journey and slow things down. But you could go multimodal when it comes to, loading up documents into these GPT engines to figure out which one has more confidence in what they actually understand. So I think the concept of multimodal, multi-vendor depends on the type of use case. To me, the chat thing is going to be probably the quickest to be commoditized in terms of the base level conversation, but its ability to extract context from either emails or large, documents. I think that's where you'll start to see some difference between the LLMs and multimodal might be of value depending on your volume and scale.
Yeah, great points there, Charles and Najeeb. And I think it's a decision between, do you want a generalist for your use case or do you want a specialist for your use case, right? So that's how we probably look at it. And I'm seeing questions come in.
I think Sumon's commiserating with the point Charles made.
Yeah, Sumon, feel free to send in more questions if you have any more. And we've got 1 minute left. Quickly, in that 1 minute, if a question doesn't come in, Charles, what are your thoughts on the trends that we're going to see in generative AI, right? What's the future for generative AI?
Yeah, so it's exciting future, right? Like I think we're still at the infancy stage, and there's a lot of and there's a lot of new capabilities coming. I mentioned kind of one earlier, but to me, one of the cool future trend that I think will be transformative is really the concept of multimodal understanding within Gen AI. Right. So what I mean by that is really enabling Gen AI to not only process and generate image and text, but also audio and video. And the key here is not just kind of processing or outputting these different format by isolation, such as taking a text input and outputting image, or taking audio and transcripting into text. These already kind of exist in different LLMs or different applications today. What I'm talking about is really the processing of and outputting in a combination of different format or media. So let me kind of give you an example. So imagine being able to create an entire movie or video games based on text description or image concept or video sample, or even a combination of those inputs to really generate a multimedia output. And to me, I think this is one that, in my opinion, will really fundamentally transform the way we interact with and consume media content in the future.
Wow, some great points, Charles, and I'm looking forward to where will get to in this Gen AI journey. So that brings us to the end of our webinar, guys, and our Automate series. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us as we went through this journey. It's been a great journey, and we are planning something for the future and hope to grow this community. So stay tuned for more updates on this Automate webinar series. Thank you, everyone, guys. It's been great on this journey with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
so much, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.